The night before Christmas carried a sound like a verdict. It arrived thin and bright through the vents above the guest room, where she wrapped paper that felt suddenly too small for the things she wanted to hold. The laughter downstairs was practiced, the kind that belongs to people who rehearse kindness and swallow cruelty. It slid under the door like a current and in a single breath became the place where a life could break. She heard her name with an ease that made the blood go cold. It was spoken like a label to be rearranged, an object lesson to be staged. Plans were sketched in hushes and chuckles, a present that would show she had failed, a story to tell that would reduce her to a threadbare version of herself in front of relatives and neighbors. Someone suggested questions about work. Someone else prepared jokes about a broken love life. Their tone was casual, intimate, the kind that made humiliation look like charity. She folded the pajamas with hands that would not betray the tremor. For years she had learned the art of disappearing in a room full of relatives. She had practiced the smile, the small laugh, the obedient nod. All that practice had been an investment in being acceptable. That night, with Christmas lights reflected in family faces, she chose a different currency. She decided not to be the spectacle. She decided instead to present a truth, so bright it would make them squint. Her name was Mara. She had left their small town 7 years earlier with a duffel, a head full of books, and a plan to build a life where accomplishment would not require diminishing someone else. In the city, she learned to be loud enough to earn a paycheck and quiet enough to think. She became a features editor, the kind who stitched people's ordinary days into narratives that made readers slow down. Her stories carried the names of the places that swallowed people whole and the laws that let the powerful bend reality. She believed in truth. She believed that telling it well could change the edges of a life. At home, things continued to exist as if she had never left. Her mother arranged the living room for photographs, the same careful set of ornaments and lace that had been visible in frames for decades. Her sister Naomi, who had never left, had turned devotion into a currency, attendance at every event, the right grade on every moral ledger. Her father, once an honest contractor, had grown irritable with the world and tender toward the son who could not find a steady job, but had always been a favorite. The family business, Rivers Properties, had been a quiet engine of status in town, and when the old contractor died, the house began to smell more of ledger books than of wood shavings. Rumors arrived like leaves. She was unlucky in love. She'd taken a fall at work. She had fragile finances. None of those rumors had the teeth of truth, but they were enough for the family to begin arranging a corrective lesson. The plan they formed with holiday precision was not only cruel, it was structural. If they could create a public moment of humiliation, something she could not answer, in that room without making herself smaller, then the rumor would stop being rumor and become history, which made her listening to them a risk and a blessing. Risk because they would feel betrayed if the private became public. Blessing because what they believed she lacked was evidence of their own misdeeds. Among the sisters and cousins who practiced contempt like a morning ritual, someone had been taking care of the family's books with a different hand. Contracts had been padded, appraisals altered, small properties siphoned into shell accounts. She had not discovered it as sensation, but as a slow gathering of threads, an article here, a sidebar there, a footnote in a municipal filing. That knowledge had sat beneath her ribs for months like an ember. It could remain gentle and secret, or it could be used. She'd returned home for a holiday in the hope of something that had no guarantee: reconciliation, perhaps, or the simple comfort of a shared meal. She found instead a theater set. So she opened the folder she had kept like a talisman for difficult evenings and knew it was time to unpack another kind of gift. Rising ACTIM morning arrived with the false cheer of a town that likes the idea of tradition better than the reality of people. She descended the stairs in a sweater the color of ash and kept her posture as if she were entering a smaller life than the one she had built. Her mother kissed her cheek with practiced tenderness while her sister's smile measured her like a seamstress who tightens a stitch when the fabric is loose. The relatives clustered, flossed by polite questions. A great aunt suggested the weather. A cousin asked if she had found someone new. Naomi asked about career choices with the tone of someone surveying a nuisance. The first round of teasing was a set of small rakes across skin, nothing savage. Only the kind of comments that become a pattern if repeated. She listened, letting them measure and misjudge. Her father cleared his throat and suggested that a year of support at home might be wise. He used words that made listening neighbors nod and lean in as if they were witnessing an act of fiscal wisdom. The script was simple: make the subject squirm politely, offer counsel, show the audience how to sympathize without acting. The family had prepared a gift that would mark them as gods. Naomi had wrapped it with a hand that pretended to tremble and the ribbon of a woman who hoped her cruelty would be mistaken for concern. The box was bright and ridiculous. When it was handed to her with self-satisfied flourish, she realized it was meant to be the punchline. She unwrapped it with the slow care of someone defusing a bomb and found a booklet, pocketed with clip art of success and patronizing phrases. Cameras flashed. Snickers rippled. The room shimmered with a cruelty that thought itself clever. She set the booklet aside, like something that might one day be used to light a stove. She let their small triumphs exist. Then she stood. Not loudly. Not as a spectacle. She let the silence gather like an audience that had forgotten how to breathe. She removed from her bag the things that had sat under her coat all night: printed bank transfers, scanned deeds, audio transcriptions, a carefully curated digital folder labeled with bureaucratic exactness. She connected her laptop to the television that sat in the room like a ceremonial altar and waited for the moment. Their laughs could be pierced by other sounds. She didn't want to humiliate them for the thrill. She wanted to end the evening in knowledge where they could see the shape of what they had been doing. She clicked open one document and then another. The first image on the screen was a bank transfer with dates that matched the times her family had purchased renovations with money that should have been held for other owners. The next slide showed shell company names cross-referenced with the family's addresses. The audio file began to play with brittle voices and her mother's laugh. And then the hush that followed was the sort of silence that settles over a crowd. When a train goes off the tracks, the room emptied of bravado with the economy of a startled flock. She watched their faces reveal themselves, red with shame, pale with panic, brittle with the first poison of denial. Her mother's hands trembled as the facts sank in. Numbers, signatures, the pattern of work padded into profits. Naomi's jaw clenched as the camera lens in a cousin's hand captured every micro-reaction. Her father, the man whose posture had once seemed immovable, sagged into a chair as if he'd been struck by an unseen force. There were attempts at explanation. Small pleas for leeway that were swallowed in the face of evidence. The room tried to rebuild narrative as if a new explanation could be erected like a wall to hide their deeds. But the documents were clear. Appraisals had been doctored. Taxes had been filed with omissions. Funds intended for property restoration had been redirected. Vendors had invoices that matched none of the work done. The last file to play was a series of recordings where quiet voices could be heard discussing how to make the numbers work and how the board would keep quiet. There was a cold professionalism to it. It was not the accidental stumble of amateurs, but the careful work of people who knew how to keep a track clear. She'd expected rage, and it came in a form she had not fully anticipated. The violence of the small, the attempt to reclaim dignity through the denigration of someone else. There were accusations that she had planted the documents. There were cries that she had betrayed the family for the sake of a newspaper headline. But her actions had been deliberate and slow. She'd waited until the truth could not be disputed. She had not come with a howl but with an archive. The photographs were printed to paper so that even a phone's screen could not be waved away as a forgery. For every attempt to redirect, she had another file pressed like a keystone in place. When Naomi stood and used the family name as a shield, she produced the municipal notices that said otherwise. When her father spoke of legacy, she produced the ledger entries of clients whose homes had been altered and whose trust had been sold. When the room tried to take the moral high ground by invoking charity funds and community work, she held up canceled checks, showing transfers into private accounts. As questions turned to legal threats and the word lawyer entered the conversation, she felt neither triumph nor revenge. She felt a profound fatigue lift as if carrying truth had been a load on her chest for years, and now, finally, the weight had been acknowledged. The police were called not as a social ritual but as agents who would inventory the facts. Journalists requested statements the next day. Regulators took the first steps that would untangle shell accounts from civic funds. The family's power, which had relied on a quiet complicity, began to erode in an hour that felt like a watershed. And in the middle of this unmaking, she realized what had kept her coming home for a decade and away for another. A hope that family could be better than its defense mechanisms. that kindness might be larger than fear. That night she gave them an option that was simple and impossible: ownership of their deeds and the chance to confess before the law obliged. No one took it. Instead, the house they had, designed for appearances, became a place full of secret doors, opening at once in the shoulders of men who had been tall shrinking. Under the clarity of light, the months that followed were an anatomy of repair. Naomi negotiated a plea while her mother surrendered the family license, and arrangements unfolded that would not allow Rivers Properties to operate in the same way. The town, which had long accepted a curated image, read articles that altered how people considered the names on the mailboxes and the hands that shook in the real estate offices. Clients requested audits. Vendors called for reconciliation. The legal process was slow and lit by boring forms, but its momentum created a new normal where the old advantages could no longer guarantee silence. For her, a life that had been built in edges and pauses became a life that could sustain brightness. She returned to her city apartment with its unadorned walls and a new sense of arrival. She took fewer calls that had to do with damage control and more calls about making space for other people's truth. She published an article that was not sensational but precise, one that named the patterns of behavior that allowed corruption to hide inside family loyalty. Her editors called it a civic account. Her readers called it a necessary read. At Christmas the following year, she sent a careful card to the town with no photograph, only a single line that said she hoped that people who had been hurt would find repair. She did not send presents to the house that had made her the subject of a lesson. She did not attend public anniversaries where the family might perform a reconciliation that lacked depth. She instead began a small fund in her father's name that would pay for independent audits for families selling homes, funded to reduce the risk that a fragile trust could be exploited by the people who were supposed to steward it. The truth had done more than topple reputations. It had shifted the axis of a place. The family's humiliation was public and necessary. It did not feel like celebration. Justice rarely does. But she learned that to survive among people who would trade your dignity for an anecdote, you needed to keep your hands on documents, on records, and on the study discipline to present evidence without hatred. Years later, the town's holiday lights still shone. She had found a life that let her write about other people's turning points without being swallowed by them. The night she thought of that Christmas Eve no longer made her flinch. They made her steady. Being the one who opened the folder and turned the television on had been less about punishment and more about preserving a future that could not be bought with polite smiles. She kept one ornament from the house, a small carved star, and placed it on her tree each year as a reminder. Truth is a cold, bright thing, and holding it can be the warmest act of all.